Anytime the leader of an organization looks you dead in the eye and with a straight face and zero sense of irony tells you that the motto of his group is "who obeys is never wrong," you might want to reconsider whether or not you continue participating because, babe, you might be in a cult. That's what more people should have said beginning in the 1970s when a young man named Opus Figari decided to create a religious community with that very phrase as its internal guiding maxim. Fast forward some 50-odd years, 3 popes and 1 Vatican investigation later, and you can't throw a rock without hitting someone referring to Figari's organization as a sect or Figari himself as a depraved monster. My, how the times have changed. This is a story about greed and power, about those who trample on human rights and those who fight to uplift those rights from the mud. This is a story about religion and government and the politics that run through each. This is a story about predators and prey and the mechanisms that appear to, time and again, favor, aid, and protect one over the other. This is a story about a cult and a cult leader who took the demands that he made of his followers to new and grotesque extremes. You are about to learn the history and downfall of one of the Roman Catholic Church's most lauded and feted religious organizations, the crimes of its founder and leadership, and the names of those who fought to expose the truth. My name is Beck Griffin. Welcome to the Deep Dive Project. I have a few quick notices and disclaimers to get out of the way before we dive in. This episode comes with a heavy trigger warning. We are going to be discussing some very difficult topics related to DV, SA, CSA, and more. Please keep your own mental health in mind if you choose to proceed. All of the information that I am presenting in this video is publicly available on the World Wide Web, and you can access this information for yourself by going to the source document linked in the description of this episode. Additionally, this is a representation of my opinion of the organization Sodalitium Christianae Vitae and the people connected to it, and everything that I say is alleged unless otherwise proven in a court of law. Do not contact, attempt to contact, or harass anyone mentioned in this video on behalf of me, yourself, or anyone else. I began this project back in 2020 when I became aware of an active and ongoing human rights crisis occurring within the Catholic organization Opus Dei, and while I have continued to cover the developments pertaining to Opus Dei, which you can catch up on my platform, I have gained a greater awareness and appreciation for how common the themes and elements I have discussed are, which brings us to today's episode. The purpose of this episode and of the Deep Dive Project as a whole is to give my perspective on issues related to human rights and to notify you of matters of public concern. I have done my best to substantiate any claims concerning legal battles and scandals, but even so, the information that I present today should not be considered complete or comprehensive in any way. This video is part 1 of what is now at least a 2-part series that I will be releasing, digging into what might just be one of the most significant religious organizations of the 21st century. And I'm betting you've never even heard of it. So make sure you subscribe for part 2, and I hope that you will treat my content as a starting place for your own research. Remember that everyone has bias. Question everything and dig past the headlines. I dare you. Lastly, if you or someone that you know needs mental health support, I have linked a variety of global resources in this episode description. Life is hard, but we do not have to go at it alone or totally unequipped. If you need help, please reach out. In order to fully appreciate the downfall of this religious organization and the people connected to it, it's important to take it in along with the full socio-political context and the nuance of the society in which it played out. I don't think that I am asking too much there because the time and society in question are our own. You're going to hear a lot of new names, see a lot of new places and new people, but peel away the proper nouns and geographic and cultural differences, and what has played out has been playing out here in the United States, and Germany and Poland and Spain and everywhere else, it seems. In many ways, it feels like two agendas are coalescing simultaneously: a coup d'etat on democracy and a crusade to expose the actors behind that coup, racing at breakneck speed on a collision course. This is hardly the time or the place to launch into a conspiratorially loaded conversation about global agendas, because the point is that while you may be tempted to think that this situation has nothing to do with you because you're not Catholic, or you're not Peruvian, or you don't work in education or media or government, the fact is it has everything to do with you, if in no other sense than that by being aware of what has happened and who did it, you can make informed decisions about the people and organizations that you support. If our governmental bodies have been hijacked, and our media and educational institutions infiltrated, and our social causes appropriated and rendered useless, it is truly up to each of us to be informed members of society and to link arms in a way that cannot be controlled by partisan interests. The best place to launch into this mess is at the beginning, and with the person who can be credited with the entire concept. Luis Fernando Figari is a Peruvian Catholic who was born in Lima, Peru on July 8, 1947, the last of 4 children. After completing his primary education in Peru, he went on to study first humanities and law at the Pontifical Catholic University of Peru, and then at the National University of San Marcos in Lima, as well as theology at the Pontifical and Civil School of Theology in Lima. In 1971, when Figari was just 24 years old, Sodalitiam Christianae Vitae crystallized in what he referred to as the baptism of a search. Identified as the Sodalitium, the Sodality, the Sodalitio, or the SCV interchangeably, the organization was founded by Figari with the help of a man named German Doeg and others. The foundation and development of Sodalitium was supported and monitored by Cardinal Juan Landazuri, Archbishop of Lima. SCV was one of several Catholic societies of apostolic life that came up as a conservative reaction to the left-leaning liberation theology movement that swept through Latin America in the 1960s. Societies of apostolic life are considered new organizational types within the Catholic Church, but in reality, the concept can be traced back to the 16th and 17th centuries with the establishment of foundations started by Philip Neri, Charles Borromeo, and Vincent de Paul. In a BBC article, the journalist Paola Ugaz, who will come up again, is quoted saying that the Sodalitium was an ideological response within the Church to liberation theology and its messages for a church of the poor and greater social justice, an ideological knee-jerk reaction, if you will. In 1972, the auxiliary bishop of Lima encouraged SCV to develop in the Archdiocese of Lima. For non-Catholic listeners, an archdiocese is the term used for the district or region under an archbishop's authority. The Diocese of Huaraz, Peru, promulgated a decree of praise inviting SCV members to carry out their apostolic mission in that diocese later that same year, and in 1977, SCV statutes were approved. It appears that SCV was received with warmth and gusto, and between 1970 and 2011, SODA enjoyed rapid expansion across Latin and North America, finding a toehold not only in Peru, but also in Colombia, Brazil, Ecuador, Chile, Argentina, Costa Rica, and more. In January 1985, the Christian Life Movement and the Vida y Espiritualidad Association were formed. In 1986, the Sodalites expanded outside of Peru for the first time, taking over responsibilities for a parish in Brazil. The following year, in June 1987, SODA opened its first pastoral center in Lima, Instituto del Sur, offering courses for technical careers from a perspective of integral human formation. On March 25, 1991, Figari founded the Marian Community of Reconciliation, an association of consecrated women dedicated to apostolic service within the community. He would add to this in August of 1988 when he founded the Servants of the Plan of God. On February 22, 1994, Sodalitium was erected as a Society of Apostolic Life of Diocesan Rite. According to the internet, that's a fancy way of saying that it's a group within the Catholic Church that comes together for a specific purpose and lives eternally, prioritizing mission over community life. Throughout the 90s and early aughts, Sodalitium established a number of communities throughout Latin America, North America, and even in Rome, such as the Mother of Faith, Our Lady of the Sea, the Immaculate Heart of Mary, Our Lady of the Evangelization, Our Lady of Carmen, and so on. At its height, SCV claimed to have thousands of members, around 20,000 based on what I read, spread across South America and the United States, with its U.S. base in Denver and enjoying particular influence in Peru, where it gained a reputation as one of the most powerful and influential religious entities in the country. Members of SCV did not take vows, but instead made promises defined in the Code of Canon Law. In addition to the associations and communities, SCV also became entrusted with church communities, parishes, and became involved in youth apostolates in universities and in high school education. As Superior General of the SCV, Figari oversaw the organization's foundation, expansion, and implementation of numerous apostolic efforts, a number of which, such as the Christian Life movement, were recognized and given papal approval. In 1984, Figari was invited to participate in the First World Youth Day in Rome. In 2002, John Paul II named Figari consultor to the Pontifical Council for the Laity. In 2005, Benedict XVI named him auditor for the Synod of Bishops on the Eucharist, and he was one of the few non-religious individuals invited to that assembly. And in 2006, Figari addressed the closing words to Benedict XVI in the encounter of the ecclesial movements and new communities with the Pope at the Vigil of Pentecost in St. Peter's Square. All of that, spread out over the course of numerous decades and 2 different papacies, indicates to me that Figari had full approval and support of the highest members of the Roman Curia. He was a steadily rising star, surely destined for greater and greater responsibility and prestige within the Catholic Church. And with support coming from Rome and from within the diocese where SCV was invited to establish itself, the organization seemed poised to begin enjoying the type of windfall organizations like Opus Dei or the Legionaries of Christ came into. But all of that came to a reluctant, faltering halt beginning in 2011. Rumors of problems within SOTA emerged at least as far back as 2011, but some claims may date back some 11 years earlier. For example, it was reported in 2003 that a couple accused SOTA of brainwashing their son and intentionally destroying their relationship with him. This prompted SCV to allow the press into its communities for the first time, attempting to smooth over any concerns that the public might have. But the stories and allegations persisted. One of the earliest alleged victims, a man named Jose Enrique Escardo Steck, described abuse that he had suffered at the hands of Figari and his co-founder Doeg, along with other people in the SOTA hierarchy. According to a report in BBC Mundo, his superiors forced him to sleep for a month on a staircase and eat rice pudding with ketchup, and they tried to intimidate him with a blade at his neck. He also said that he and his colleagues were sometimes forced to hit and take hits from others in what he described as an organized bullying system. A woman who had been a Sodalite's sister alleged that Doeg inappropriately touched her during a yoga session. In response, the SCV's spokesperson maintained bad things have happened in the past and maybe in some random faraway places that no one has ever heard of, which is sad, but everything's groovy now messaging strategy. Incredibly, mind-boggling though it might be, a cause for Doeg's beatification was initiated several years after his death, although luckily the Vatican did the rare right thing and froze the beatification process on the grounds that someone convicted of the types of sexual abuse Doeg had probably wouldn't be a great candidate to represent all that is good and holy in the Catholic Church. Another alleged victim stated that Figari had shown him pornographic magazines and asked him to sit on a stick. Another ex-member detailed Figari's early and apparent fascination with fascist movements and literature. According to him, one of the Sodality's founding principles was that its members should practice absolute obedience in terms of schedules, activities, readings, way of dress, and even professional studies. In essence, total control and conformity through every aspect of the members' lives. And then, in 2007, the Peruvian police detained Sodalitzia member Daniel Murguia Ward along with an 11-year-old little boy whom Ward had been about to photograph naked. Ward, who had been close to Figari, was sentenced but was released just 3 years later by a decision of the Peruvian Supreme Court. In October of 2010, Figari expressed his intention to step down from the leadership of the sodality. That following December, he submitted his official letter of resignation to the Congregation for Institutes of Consecrated Life and Societies of Apostolic Life. In accordance with organizational statutes, the Vicar General assumed leadership and convened the Extraordinary General Assembly to elect a new Superior General. Former members would file formal complaints with the Lima Archdiocese beginning in May of 2011 against Figari. No following action was taken, and in fact, from the timeline of events published on sodalitium.org, accusations and letters about accusations and reports concerning investigations into accusations bounced back and forth between this tribunal and that congregation to the SCV and back again. But it is worth noting that nothing truly substantial happened until several years later, and the SCV, for its part, continuously denied any and all allegations. Figari's lawyer, a man named Juan Armando Lengua Balbi, stated in response to the anonymous nature of many of the accusations that, quote, "there cannot be perpetrators if there are no clear aggrieved parties," a statement clearly intending to downplay what was being said and discredit who was saying it. In 2015, frustrated by the lack of response, the former member, journalist, and victim of Figari, Pedro Salinas, decided to take matters into his own hands. He co-wrote a book with the journalist I mentioned earlier, Paola Ugaz, exposing SCV, and titled it Half Monks, Half Soldiers. In this book, he reported that during his time in SCV during the 1980s, he witnessed what he described as sectarian characteristics and was the victim of mistreatment and abuse, including sexual abuse, on the part of the SCV's founder, Figari. The book also featured 30 different testimonies of abuses that occurred over almost 30 years at the hands of the same people who tormented and abused Salinas, including Figari. Some of the stuff that these predators did, according to Salinas and Ugaz, is pretty wild and disgusting. For example, one victim alleged that when he was 17, Figari told him that it was time to open the third eye to see the auras better, and that Figari would awaken the victim's kundalini by depositing his semen into the victim's sacral bone. Whatever that means. Combined with Doeg allegedly assaulting a woman during yoga, I think there were some interpretive liberties being taken with a number of religious concepts, and honestly, I find that pretty offensive, but all of this is wildly offensive, so what else is new? In addition, it was revealed that Figari had a history of political extremism, particularly during his youth when he became involved in Catholic far-right and phalangist groups. Remember what I said earlier about fascism? Well, Figari had apparently been openly sympathetic to fascism, and Salinas accused him of admiring fascist leaders like Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini, stating that Figari admired the oratory of Hitler and Mussolini. He was inspired by Nazi marches, and he had a fascination with the Hitler Youth. Church authorities began investigating when it was revealed that Salinas was not the only former member to have reported abuse. Oh my gosh, what a shock. While Figari blatantly denied the accusations, SCV released statements indicating its commitment to helping any of Figari's victims who would come forward, forming a committee comprised of members and non-members to help any person affected, identifying the incidents as intolerable because they involve grave suffering for persons who trusted our community. Now, this is the point in the story where I am going to take a hard left and talk about another key individual in this situation, someone who has worked overtime to bring the story of Figari's abuses and his organization's sect-like practices to light, and who suffered for it, and that is Paola Ugaz, Salinas' co-author. Paola Ugaz, or Paola Margot Ugaz Cruz, is an investigative journalist who has become known for her work, which exposed a massive child abuse scandal within the SCV. She has worked in news media and journalism in some capacity since 1999, and prior to co-authoring Half Monks, Half Soldiers, she wrote several books exposing political corruption and human rights abuses. It is pretty clear to me that Ugaz is a woman of conviction who believes in fighting for human rights. In the 2010s, she worked on the Chelina de la Esperanza initiative, which sought to honor victims of the politically motivated Peruvian Shining Path conflict, which I will be discussing in a bit more length later on in this episode. During that same time period, she began investigating alleged cases of sexual, physical, and psychological abuse of young boys committed under the auspices of the Sodalitium. Pedro Salinas was Ugaz's co-worker, which I would imagine made her work with Salinas even more meaningful. Their work and the publication of their book ultimately became the linchpin in the Peruvian government launching an investigation and in Figari being sanctioned by the Vatican. But it wasn't all sunshine and roses. In July of 2018, 3 years after the publication of Half Monks, Half Soldiers, the Archbishop of Piura, a man named Ugiran Anselmi, filed criminal defamation suits against both Salinas and Ugaz over previous investigative reports in which Anselmi was named as not only complicit in SCV's abuses, but also of land trafficking in Piura. Stay tuned for part 2 of this miniseries, in which I will go into more depth about the SCV's alleged land trafficking, tax evasion, and fraud. But as far as these defamation suits go, Anselmi would eventually win his case against Salinas, but withdrew both complaints after a bunch of negative criticism from secular and ecclesial sectors. He would eventually go on to receive disciplinary action from the Vatican for these stunts. Despite that, Ugaz continued to suffer harassment in the form of legal notices from individuals and associations with ties to the SCV, accusing her of defamation because once Ugaz learned that there were abuses occurring within the Sodalitium, she just kept digging. In April 2015, the Congregation for Institutes of Consecrated Life and Societies of Apostolic Life sent an apostolic visitor named Bishop Fortunato Ursi, tasked with investigating the charges of improper behavior against Figari for the period of 1 year. Concurrently with that investigation, in 2016, Archbishop Joseph W. Tobin, who confirmed me, funnily enough, back in the day when I was 11 years old, was named to oversee the reform of the SCV. In 2016, Figari made his last public comments, stating once again that he was innocent and had no idea if there were victims or not. Quote, "I do not know if there are victims." End quote. In January of 2017, the results of Ursi's investigation concluded with the congregation decreeing that Figari should have no further contact with members of the Sodalit community. Ursi's report revealed that while Figari was Superior General of the SCV, he had adopted a style of government excessively or improperly authoritarian, directed to impose one's own will, such that in order to obtain the obedience of his brothers, he used improper strategies and methods of persuasion, that is to say, underhanded, arrogant, and nonetheless violent and disrespectful of the rights to the inviolability of one's own interiority and discretion. Figari appealed twice, both were rejected. Concurrently with that investigation, an SCV-commissioned outside investigation released a report which determined that Figari sodomized his recruits and subjected them to humiliating psychological and sexual abuses. A total of 30 allegations of abuse by Figari and his closest associates had been submitted. The report accused Figari of narcissistic, paranoid, demeaning, vulgar, vindictive, manipulative, racist, sexist, and elitist behavior accompanied by an obsession with sexual issues and sexual orientation. Figari reportedly liked to watch other people experience pain, discomfort, and fear. He had a particular preoccupation with using humility as a control tactic. In a statement released around 2018, the Holy See press office stated that then Pope Francis has shown particular attention to the gravity of the information regarding that internal regime, formation, and economic and financial management, which formed the basis for his insistence that the Vatican authorities treat the scandal with real attention and seriousness. This resulted in the Vatican appointing a commissioner to oversee the SCV. Figari clung to his position of authority within Soda. At that time, the Vatican refused to expel Figari, simply ordering him to live apart from the Sodalitium community in Rome and to cease contact with it. The discipline was referred to as a golden exile because it came without any teeth and without any additional punitive action. It's important to note that although it had initially been widely reported that Figari had been expelled from the Sodalitium as a whole, the reality is that he had merely been banned from the community life aspect. That's why a 2019 article from the Catholic News Agency reported that the mother of the Reconciler community in Rome, where Figari was living, was suppressed as part of the 2017 decree banning Figari from contact with the Sodalizium communities. That same year, at the conclusion of its 2019 General Assembly, the SCV issued a statement of forgiveness and reconciliation, lamenting the cases of abuse committed not just by Figari, but by other members of the SCV as well. They stated, "We consider it a duty as an assembly to make a public statement on the relationship of our community with Luis Fernando Figari, whom we cannot consider as a spiritual exemplar for our Sodalit community. We strongly condemn, and at the same time, with pain and shame, the abuses committed by him, the abuse of his authority, his lack of respect for freedom, the physical and psychological abuses, the sexual abuse, which were denounced and investigated by our community and the Holy See." From all appearances, it seemed like Soda was invested in righting wrongs, but Ugaz, someone who had been wrapped up in the downfall of this religious organization for quite some time, had a decidedly different experience. In a 2023 interview, she shared that while the developments with the SCV put her and Salinas' book and work center stage, they suffered a retaliatory barrage of disinformation. A disinformation ecosystem was created. A group of journalists began to look for and invent lies about me and Pedro, and that's how it all begins. They write bizarre things like I trade uranium and plutonium with Morgana Vargas Llosa in the north of the country, and that is why we want the Sodalicio to leave. The feedback was like that. They invented the news and in turn published it in the newspapers with covers and everything, sent it to the prosecutor's office and used politicians to tell them to open an investigation into me and Pedro. Since 2018, I have always been in demand. I am in danger. In this country, there is preventive detention. That is, I can go to jail at the request of the prosecutor's office, and they can take many measures. In fact, in the document where they notify me of the latest demand, they state, among other things, that my communications be lifted. In other words, the lifting of communications is very serious, because, of course, they want to access my communications with victims. There are a lot of victims of sexual abuse. They are vulnerable people among the vulnerable, and they want to access that. That is serious because it is a disastrous precedent. I want to spend just a moment talking about what they put this woman through because it is pretty sobering, and the links that people attached to the SCV and Opus Dei will go to in order to cover their asses. And yes, of course, Opus Dei is wrapped up in this. The Archbishop of Piura and Tombs filed those false criminal defamation suits against Ugaz for having the gall to tweet about him and the sketchy religious organizations that he was attached to. And then a businessman named Alberto Gomez de la Torre filed 2 suits against Ugaz for alleged false statements and for participating in an Al Jazeera documentary called The Sodalizium Scandal. In 2020, the director of a Catholic news site, La Abeja, Luciano Reveredo, filed a criminal defamation lawsuit against Ugaz for daring to say that La Abeja had been defamatory and misogynistic in their coverage of her legal battles. In 2021, the Peruvian Public Prosecutor's Office opened a scam investigation into Ugaz in relation to alleged money laundering, an accusation that was supported with apparently fake WhatsApp messages. In 2022, a trial court acquitted Ugaz in the defamation case brought against her by Reveredo. And I'm not sure about the current status of her other legal disputes, but in light of everything that we have gone over, it truly does appear as if Ugaz and also Pedro Salinas have been the targets of a coordinated attack employing defamation laws to try to suppress discussions of matters of public concern. The impact these types of legal games have on the free exchange of information and discussion of the issues being raised cannot be overstated. It is an abuse of these institutions and systems to the grossest extent. Ugaz's work has been so impactful and important to the people of Peru that she inspired a play titled Proyecto Ugaz, in which Ugaz appeared as a key figure in the tireless search for justice for the victims of the abuse networks linked to the Sodalizium. Her courage and conviction in defending her research, herself, and her family inspired director Diego Gargovich to tell the story on the stage. In an interview, Gargovich was quoted saying, "If journalism through the written word reveals corruption, theater turns it into a collective cry because theater is community. The influence that SCV has wielded and their clear willingness to use it against any who have attempted to expose the links of their corruption and what it must feel like to have the full force of their influence coming to bear truly cannot be stressed too much. It boggles the mind, and I can only imagine how you guys and Salinas have felt going through this experience, dealing with this insane organization. I have so much respect for Salinas and for all of the victims who were brave enough to speak out, and for Yugaz, who has continuously refused to back down, even as her life and liberty and the safety of her family have been threatened by the same corrupt system that she's been fighting to expose. Knowing more about the abuses that the victims likely endured and the price that Yugaz and Salinas have had to pay for attempting to expose it all makes the following developments in the SCV's story all the more impactful. In July 2023, a Vatican-sanctioned report written by Bishop Cicluna and Monsignor Jordi Bertomeu, who are popularly regarded as the Vatican's top sex crimes investigators, by the way, revealed after their visit to Peru sadistic, sect-like abuses of power, authority, and spirituality, economic abuses in administering church money, and even journalistic abuses, like harassing critics and even hacking private communications. In April of 2024, the Vatican accepted the resignation of Archbishop Jose Ugarin Anselmi following his attempts at suing Salinas and Yugaz for their exposure of the SCV and having not nice things to say about him. He also allegedly permitted and did nothing to halt the forced eviction of peasants on lands in Ugarin's diocese by a Soda-linked real estate developer. That would be the land trafficking that we were talking about earlier. In August of 2024, the Vatican officially expelled Figari from his religious movement, citing behavior that was incompatible and therefore unacceptable in a member of a church institution, as well as causing scandal and serious damage to the good of the church and of the individual members of the faithful. Interestingly, according to reporting from the AP, it was at that point that SCV finally officially distanced themselves from Figari, even though credible reports had been floating around long before the Vatican finally got around to doing something substantial about them. The Sodalizium released a statement that it welcomes the decision of the Holy Father Pope Francis to expel Luis Fernando Figari Rodrigo from the Sodalizium, as announced today by the Peruvian Conference of Bishops. Figari has, as far as I know, continued to maintain his innocence to present day. The final superior of the SCV, Jose Correa Gonzalez, released a statement in which he said that Figari is the historical founder of the Sodalizium Christianae Vitae, but he is not a spiritual reference for our community. We want to continue to work so that this gift may be at the service of the evangelizing mission of the Church, end quote. Critics have pointed out that that sentiment conveyed was remarkably similar to one espoused by the Legion of Christ following the 2010 Vatican decision to waive suppression in favor of reform after it became entirely impossible for the Vatican or the Legion of Christ to ignore the accusations and the reports of abuse, fraud, and the cult of personality around the order's founder, Marcial Maciel. If you want to know more about that organization's downfall, I have an entire standalone episode dedicated to it. In September of 2024, in what was considered a special decision, Pope Francis formally expelled 10 people from SODA, including a bishop, priests, and lay people, following the results of a Vatican investigation which confirmed the existence of sadistic abuses of power, authority, and spirituality. Just a few months later, in January of 2025, Pope Francis signed the decree suppressing the Sodalizium Christianae Vitae, which went into effect April 14, 2025, 1 week to the date before Francis passed away on April 21st. The SCV is officially kaput. Now, you might think that that would be the end of the story for this organization, but you would be wrong. In order to appreciate the developments in this story, we need to switch gears and talk about one of the individuals wrapped up in this situation, someone who has lurked in the background throughout this entire story, even though you didn't know he was there. We need to talk about Juan Luis Cipriani Thorn, Opus Dei priest and former Archbishop of Lima, Peru. information about Cipriani's early years seemed somewhat scant and difficult to find. According to a Spanish news site, Cipriani was born in Lima, Peru in 1943 to a family of 11 brothers. According to his Wikipedia page, he attended the Colegio Santa Maria Marianistas, a Catholic school. According to a Vatican press release, he went on to study at the National Institute of Engineering in Lima. At some point around then or shortly after, he encountered Opus Dei and joined ostensibly as a celibate numerary in 1962. After working as an engineer for an undisclosed length of time, he was ordained a priest for the prelature in August of 1977, and he would go on to earn a doctorate in theology from the University of Navarra. The University of Navarra, or Universidad de Navarra, is located in Pamplona, Spain, and was founded in 1952 by the founder of Opus Dei, Jose Maria Escrivá de Balaguer. It continues to be an Opus Dei university to this day under the guise of a non-profit private pontifical university. Cipriani eventually returned to Lima, where he taught moral theology, which is highly rich to me for reasons that will soon become clear, at the Pontifical Catholic University of Peru on the Faculty of Theology in the city of Lima, before going on to become the regional vicar of Opus Dei for Peru and the vice chancellor for the University of Piura. The University of Piura, or Universidad de Piura, UDEP, is a private university in Peru that was founded, once again, by Jose Maria Escrivá de Balaguer, the founder of Opus Dei. And UDEP emphasizes the integral formation of its students, promoting and disseminating scientific research in all fields of human knowledge and fostering social sensitivity to address societal problems. Which sounds really, really nice if we weren't talking about an educational institution run by a cult. Throughout the 90s, Cipriani served as a consultant to the Roman Congregation for the Clergy, along with publishing various articles pertaining to doctrinal topics such as marital personality and love and catechism of social doctrine and living witnesses of Christ, or testigos vivos de Cristo. In 1999, he was named Archbishop of Lima and a cardinal in February of 2001, the first member of Opus Dei to receive that title. He was praised for both his academic work and his efforts to negotiate a resolution between hostile Peruvian and Japanese forces. The conflict resulted in hostages on both sides, whom Cipriani reportedly administered to, actions which were identified as especially remarkable. I found an interesting quote attributed to Cipriani. In 1991, he was quoted saying, "Most human rights organizations are just covering the tails of political movements. Almost all of them are Marxist and Maoist." If that sentiment strikes you as controversial, you wouldn't be alone in that. Apparently, there was quite a bit of disparity between Cipriani's theology and politics. In a now archived article from NCR published March 23, 2001, author Barbara Fraser wrote, "Peru's controversial new cardinal, Juan Luis Cipriani, longtime opponent of human rights activists in Peru, got a cool reception at his first Mass as cardinal there. The Mass was punctuated by shouts of, 'The Church, yes, Cipriani, no,' and 'Christ is justice, not complicity.' As Bishop of Ayacucho, the small city in the Central Highlands that was the epicenter of terrorist activity by Peru's Mao-inspired Shining Path, from 1980 to 1992, Cipriani hobnobbed with military officers accused of human rights violations and hurled insults at human rights organizations. In the 1980s, during the governments of Presidents Fernando Belaunde and Alan Garcia, the military waged a dirty war against the Shining Path in the Highlands. Typically, a terrorist column would enter a rural community, hold a people's trial, execute local authorities, and request food, medicine, and shelter. Anyone who refused to provide aid would be killed. Soon after the column left, a military patrol would arrive, and soldiers would torture, kill, or disappear anyone suspected of collaborating with the terrorists. Recently, Cipriani stirred up another flurry of commentary. On January 23rd, a videotape of a talk he had given to a group of cadets in the National Military School was aired on a political commentary program on television. It was liberally peppered with obscenities and off-color comments. Confronted by reporters the next day, Cipriani said, "I don't deny that I have a dirty mouth," but said the tape had been edited to cast him in the worst possible light. Certain unnamed groups were manipulating people's images for political purposes, he said. In 1992, the leader of the Shining Path was captured, and Cipriani apparently advocated he be executed. In regard to his support for the death penalty, he stated, "We cannot allow the country not to support the death penalty because of fear and cowardice of a few. The world changes day by day and not in favor of cowards. We are in a time of firmness, clarity, and manhood." The language he uses there is interesting to me, and it kind of reminds me of the language some of the political movers and shakers in my country are using today. People like Leonard Leo, Tim Bush, Kevin Roberts, and even J.D. Vance, all of whom have connections to the same organization that fostered Cipriani's career from the moment he whistled in 1962. But I digress. In 2003, Peru's Commission of Truth and Reconciliation presented to the country its 9-volume report on the violence and human rights violations that occurred between 1980 and 2000. According to an article published on the International Bulletin of Mission Research, it was reported that an estimated 69,280 Peruvians lost their lives as a result of violence, a number far greater than the original figure of 25,000 that most people had presumed to have been the death toll. In the report, the Opus Dei Archbishop of Lima, Juan Luis Cipriani, is singled out for not defending human rights and for not fulfilling his pastoral mission while he was auxiliary bishop and later Archbishop of Ayacucho, the home of the Shining Path and the Central Andes. Every day, people disappeared in Ayacucho for those years. It was a very serious problem, as well as torture and murder, but Monsignor Cipriani never questioned the human rights violations committed by the forces of order. On the contrary, he held constant and said, "It cannot be said that Peru is a place where human rights are not respected." However, he acknowledged the existence of 2 or 3 isolated situations of which derision is being made. For this reason, he constantly criticized the reports of international organizations as an intrusion into the country. At the door of the archbishopric, a blackboard said, "No claims on human rights are accepted." Cipriani responded to this, stating that, in a violent context like that of Ayacucho, the deaths, disappearances, and abuses are part of the war. Defenders of human rights will call it a dirty war. I believe that the armed forces had to use the mechanisms to know how and where these issues occurred. And when these means were used, of course, there were dead from one side and the other. I have come to the forefront of the poor and of those who have massacred this city, and during that bustle I have not seen those of the coordinator of human rights. That's ridiculousness. That quote has been attributed to Cipriani from April 14th, 1994, but I do want to note that I wasn't able to find it in print, archived, in any way, shape, or form online. In addition to apparently having a very twisted perspective of human rights, Cipriani, like another Opus Dei individual that I discussed recently, Enrique Rojas Montes, apparently holds outdated and discredited views on human sexuality and sexual orientation as well. According to his Wikipedia page, Cipriani regularly denounces efforts to recognize same-sex relationships. In 2005, Cipriani commented on the recent legalization of same-sex unions in Spain. He denounced the existence of a worldwide campaign and warned that by legalizing same-sex unions, society is disfigured. Quote, "In today's world, evil disguises itself as good. It is imposed on others, and woe to him who does not accept it." End quote. He called on the faithful not to refer to relationships that are not between a man and a woman as marriage. He said, "Call it what you want, but don't sell damaged goods. Don't traffic in that dictatorship of moral relativism in which there is nothing good, only opinion and trends of thought." End quote. He has said some other really stupid things that I am not even going to pay lip service to, including blaming women and girls who are raped and arguing for amnesty for state military officials accused of war crimes, which sounds very Operation Paperclippy to me. For a man who, to the best of my knowledge, has never been married himself, I find his perspectives on marriage and relationships and human sexuality in general extremely ignorant and short-sighted. But you will never find a more regressive, sex-obsessed bunch than the people who peddle and prattle this type of pablum. Interestingly enough, in the research of Richard Sipe et al., it was found that the overwhelming majority of religious clergy are emotionally stunted untalented and immature. And there are reasons for that, which tie back into some pretty uncomfy truths about the Catholic Church's stance on celibacy. That research is almost 30 years old now, but I have no doubt that it still holds true. And even if the tides are turning in certain quarters, that is not the case in Opus Dei. So it's not really surprising to me that Cipriani expressed the beliefs and perspectives that he did, or even, to be perfectly blunt, that he would go on to be accused of the things that he has. It's par for course at this point. So with all of that said, let's go ahead and address the biggest elephant in the room right now, which is Cipriani's real and alleged misconduct. Cipriani's issues, let's just say, encompass a relatively wide range of offenses, but which all dovetail into one massive human rights affront. We've already talked about what I view as the most glaring issue, which is Cipriani's constipated and classist view of human rights, but there's more. First, there was his response and handling of the Sodalitium scandal. He was criticized by former members like Pedro Salinas and Jose Enrique Escardo-Steck. According to a January 2025 article published in the Associated Press, Cipriani was archbishop when the first victims presented formal accusations against Sodalitium in 2011 to the church. Cipriani insisted that he handled the allegations properly, but it wasn't until Salinas and Ugaz exposed the practices of Sodalitium in their 2015 book, Half Monks, Half Soldiers, that the case began to move. Escardo attributed the church's slow response to the Sodalitium scandal and the attacks that victims endured for speaking out to the protection that Sodalitium enjoyed at the highest echelons of the church in Rome and Lima. Cardinal Cipriani was the Opus Dei bishop that Sodalitium needed, he said. While Cipriani was Archbishop of Lima, the first allegations against Sodalitium became public through a series of articles published in 2011, with formal accusations being lodged 11 years later. But given the fact that true attention was not paid to this issue until a book forced Sodalitium's abuses and Cipriani's failure out into the public domain, it's not hard to feel as if Escardo was absolutely correct and that for whatever reason, the Sodalitium enjoyed a degree of crucial protection that is very reminiscent of protections that have been extended to other religious organizations and orders like the Legionaries of Christ, for example. At any rate, on its own, it might be possible to convince yourself that Cipriani's mishandling of the Sodalitium scandal was a case of poor leadership and decision-making, rather than out-and-out misconduct, but as time would go on to tell, this situation was far from the only dark spot in Cipriani's record. In January of 2025, as the Sodalitium came to terms with the inevitability of its own dissolution, Cipriani was obliged to respond to an expose in El País with a headline which read, Juan Luis Cipriani, first cardinal of Opus Dei, was separated by the Pope in 2019 after accusations of pedophilia. The subheading further revealed that despite the fact that Pope Francis had ordered Cipriani to leave Peru and doff his cardinal attire, he returned to Lima in the 2025 New Year anyway, so that he could receive a medal from the Lima City Council. Interestingly enough, the man who gave Cipriani the award, Rafael Lopez Aliaga, also has ties to Opus Dei. El País revealed that Cipriani's expeditious retirement back in 2019 had more to do with accusations of child abuse than it had to do with Cipriani's age. The victim, now 58, had written to the Vatican in 2018 and provided his account from his youth in 1983 when he was between 16 and 17 years old. According to the victim, Cipriani had touched, caressed, and kissed him. He also claimed that Opus Dei knew about the abuses when he suffered them some 35 years before he wrote his letter to the Vatican in 2018. In response to these allegations, Cipriani penned a page-long refutation, stating that, given the accusations that the newspaper El País has published about me today, January 25th, 2025, I want to clarify that the facts they have described are completely false. I have not committed any crime or sexually abused anyone in 1983, before or after. He also bemoans all of the pain this has personally caused him, which I just find kind of in poor taste, given the context. He has continued to maintain his innocence from this and any other accusations to present day, as far as I know. And unless it's a deathbed confession, I think we're going to have to accept that Cipriani's position will never change. Now, I would be be remiss if I did not include Opus Dei's response to Cipriani's scandal. According to reporting from the AP, Opus Dei stated it was aware of the complaint against Cipriani back in 2018, even acknowledging that leadership should have treated the alleged victim better. In a statement, the vicar of Opus Dei in Peru, the Reverend Angel Gomez Hortiguela, said that the alleged victim had asked to meet with him in 2018, but that he had declined because the complaint had already been lodged at the Vatican, which has sole jurisdiction to handle accusations against cardinals. Quote, not having judicial competence in the case, when a person of the complainant's confidence asked me to meet with him, I reacted thinking that such a meeting might not be positive, the statement from Gomez Hortiguela said. Today, I realized that I could have offered him a personal, human, and spiritual welcome, which I know he received from other people in Opus Dei. Maybe he did, and maybe he didn't, and maybe it's just all hot air coming out of his ass, but considering Opus Dei's response to its own scandals, this at least feels like some sort of a step in the right direction, because some ownership of past poor judgments and behavior is being taken. That's a really important part of finding peace for a lot of victims, and acknowledgement, taking ownership, and in many cases, people never get it. So I wanted to make a point of highlighting this somewhat positive step here. Now, it should go without saying that there are two things that need to happen here, and although one of them sort of kind of happened, and there's been some sort of an acknowledgement, which is somewhat good, like I said, the other is action. What is going to be done? What will be substantially changed going forward? How will the victim or victims be cared for in the future? That matters too. I also think that it's important to point out that Opus Dei probably has a greater role to play in this whole sodalitium situation than we will probably ever know. Those who know the reality of the Catholic Church in Peru point to a fruitful coexistence between Sodalizio and Opus, who in some way reinforce each other to exercise their power. We must not forget that the defenestrated Louis Cipriani, the first cardinal of Opus Dei, was Archbishop of Lima until Francis punished him after being denounced for sexual abuse. It's a textbook sect. There is a recruitment system, in this case through withdrawals for adolescents of 14 or 15 years old. They have colleges and also universities. Figari wanted to make a South American Opus. It was absolutely his model. Well, that didn't end up playing out the way that Figari wanted it to. I mean, everybody was on board until they started to abuse those people. And what do we think it is that enabled and permitted that abuse to happen in the first place? Before we wrap up today's discussion with a tidy bow, I want to talk about a couple of things that have happened since the SCV was dissolved back in April. Because the thing about these organizations, entities which are described as powerful with links to judicial, economic, and media elite, is that they have a habit of accumulating, some might say hoarding, but who are they? Material wealth in the form of non-liquid assets like real estate, for example. According to reporting from El Diario, Sodalizio has an estate of millions of euros, which the Vatican must now see seized to, among other things, compensate the victims. They have agro-industrial companies, mining companies, travel agencies. They have share in the LATAM airline, companies in tax havens, Salinas lists, but much of this is in the name of figureheads. It is going to be a problem that the church will have to deal with when it comes to liquidation. I have no idea how they are going to do it. It also appears that papal decrees did little to stop the shreds of the SCV from trying to launch a campaign intended to discredit and smear Robert Prevost, who would go on to become Pope Leo. In a main news article published in El Diario, it was reported that in the middle of the pre-conclave, accusations of covering up abuses were launched by those around the sect when the American was bishop in Chiclayo, which had already been proven false, were resurrected. In fact, Bergoglio commissioned an analysis of the case and ruled out any responsibility of Prevost before appointing him prefect of bishops in the Curia. But with the help of ultra-Catholic media, some of them Spanish like Info Vaticana, that hoax crossed the borders of Peru and settled in Rome at a time when cardinals who had come from all over and who barely barely knew each other were preparing for a confinement in which they would have to elect a new leader for the Catholic Church. Of course, it is an operation that comes out of Sodalizio, confirms Pedro Salinas, the Peruvian journalist who, together with Paola Ugaz, uncovered the horrors of the sect in a cafe near the Apostolic Palace. This topic arose a long time ago on an ultra-conservative portal called La Abeja, and later a podcast with people linked to Sodalizio. And it appeared precisely when Prevost had removed Jose Antonio Yguirin, who was the Archbishop of Piura and Tombs, the master and lord of the church, in a territory managed by Opus Dei and Sodalizio, Salinas details. The modus operandi is always the same. You take some truth and twist it to the point that you deform it and make it something else. And from there, he jumps from one medium to another until he reaches a more respectable one. There is no evidence, but suspicion is dropped, explained Salinas. At the beginning of August, another article on Crux revealed that allegations against Prevost originated from a defrocked priest and former canon lawyer named Ricardo Coronado, an ex-Augustinian who was defrocked in December of 2024 after former residents of a formation house that Coronado ran for the Augustinian order in Peru revealed that the ex-priest had a history of sexually inappropriate behavior, along with harboring resentment toward Prevost over perceived ideological differences. Coronado was also closely affiliated with the SCV, and since Prevost also had a part to play in the investigations that were carried out leading up to the organization's suppression, this could also be another source of tension. Regardless, this behavior does not strike me as what you would expect to see from an organization that has been dissolved. In fact, it seems a whole lot more like the behavior of an organization that thought that, with Pope Francis out of the way, it might have a chance at a comeback. That doesn't show any signs of coming to fruition, but I now know for a fact that this is not the end of the story for the SCV. On June 21st, Pope Leo met with Ugaz, and in acknowledgement of what she and the other victims of the SCV went through to make their stories heard, he stated that the truth does not belong to anyone. It is the responsibility of everyone to seek it, preserve it, and serve it. Wherever a journalist is silenced, the democratic soul of a country is weakened. Do not be afraid. Through your work, be builders of peace, unity, and social dialogue. Be sowers of light in the shadows. Now, there is still a whole lot to this story that remains to be told, specifically what sort of justice the victims of this cult and its founder can expect to receive, because that is not entirely clear yet. How the SCV is connected to one of the largest data breaches in world history, and why the Vatican may be on the brink of an international financial scandal, all thanks to the SCV's shenanigans. It's coming. Don't worry. All of it is important because I think it exposes true corruption and greed and forces us to reconsider how we perceive the narratives we are told about heroes and villains. I also think that there is something to be gleaned from the fact that the Catholic Church has an established track record of trusting some pretty unscrupulous characters, and of church leadership, including popes, being taken in by a good sales pitch and some charisma, with the inherent result being a lot of harm and trauma inflicted upon innocent people. Maybe we need to start considering the extent to which we allow leaders, be they religious or secular, into our personal lives and spaces. This conversation is already in full swing in the secular world, of course, but suggests that maybe a religious person is the last person that you should be trusting with the intimate facts of your life, and that maybe we need to stop supporting religions and religious organizations that hurt people, and all of a sudden you're an anti-religious bigot. Because it's just a few bad apples, right? So I will not be suggesting any of that here. Do what thou wilt, and vaya con Dios. I hope that you enjoyed listening to this episode. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing and sharing this deep dive with someone that you know. Also, remember that details to learn more about my work, connect with me on social media, or support my endeavors are all linked down below. Also, don't forget that in addition to YouTube, you can also find the Deep Dive Project on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Rumble. If you listen there, please be sure to leave a 5-star rating or a review or comment. It helps the Deep Dive Project reach more people. If you feel like hanging around, go check out some of the other content and playlists over on my channel. Thank you for being here, and remember, nolite te bastardes carborundorum. Don't let the bastards drag you down.